The video that changed everything started like any other. Sitting in her tiny studio apartment, surrounded by ring lights she bought on sale and balanced on stacks of books, Lynn recorded what she thought would be just another commentary on tech news. Her phone was propped against a coffee mug, and her cat kept trying to knock it over. Just another Tuesday night for a content creator with barely 2,000 followers. So, you're telling me this guy worth billions couldn't figure out that students need more than just fancy tablets? She said to her phone, rolling her eyes. Like, hello. Maybe try asking actual students what they need instead of assuming everyone wants your overpriced gadgets. Lynn hadn't bothered dressing up for this one. She wore her favorite oversized sweater with coffee stains she hoped wouldn't show on camera, her hair messily tied up. The video was just another quick take on the day's tech news, this time about a billionaire's failed attempt to revolutionize education with some expensive new learning platform. She added her usual mix of memes and trending sounds, tossed in some silly transitions, and hit post before heading to bed. Her expectations: maybe 100 likes if she was lucky. She'd been creating content for 2 years, and her biggest hit so far had only reached 5,000 views. But something different happened this time. She woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop. At first, she thought it was her alarm having a meltdown. Then she saw the notifications. 10,000 views, then 50,000. By lunch, it had crossed 1 million. Her clever takedown of the tech billionaire's failed project had struck a nerve. Comments flooded in. Finally, someone said it. This is the best breakdown of that disaster launch. The way you explained it, spot on. Even other content creators were sharing it, adding their own takes and amplifying her message. Lynn sat in her favorite coffee shop, watching the numbers climb with shaking hands. Her following jumped from 2,000 to 50,000 in hours. Her inbox filled with interview requests from tech blogs and news sites. Someone even created a remix of her rant that was trending on its own. This is insane, she whispered to herself, nearly knocking over her third cup of coffee as another notification lit up her screen. Her best friend called, screaming about how she'd just seen Lynn's face on a major news website. But among all the excitement, one notification made her heart stop. An email from an address ending in the billionaire's company domain. The subject line read, "Regarding your recent video. Meeting request." Lynn stared at her phone screen, her coffee growing cold. This wasn't supposed to happen. Regular people like her didn't get noticed by billionaires. They certainly didn't get emails from their companies. Was she in trouble? Was this about to become a legal nightmare? With trembling fingers, she opened the email, expecting the worst. But the words she read made even less sense than her sudden viral fame. They weren't threatening to sue her. Instead, they were inviting her to their headquarters. As she walked home that evening, passing the same streets she'd walked 1,000 times before, everything felt different. The weight of her phone in her pocket felt heavier, knowing it now contained an email that could change her life. Tomorrow morning, she would need to decide: delete the email and go back to her regular life, or step into something that could be either the biggest opportunity or the biggest mistake of her career. She looked up at the gleaming towers of the city's business district, wondering which one housed the office she'd just been invited to. Somewhere up there, a billionaire had watched her video and, instead of getting angry, had seen something worth reaching out to. The question was, what exactly had they seen? And what did they want? The security guard looked at Lynn's ID card for what felt like the 100th time. She tugged nervously at her blazer, the only formal piece of clothing she owned, borrowed from her roommate. The massive glass building seemed to touch the clouds, and she felt smaller with each passing second. "They're ready for you now," the receptionist said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Lynn's shoes, also borrowed, clicked against the marble floor as she followed a stern-looking assistant to the elevator. Her heart was doing backflips. Just last week, she'd been making fun of this company from her tiny apartment. Now she was in their headquarters, heading to the top floor. The elevator ride was silent and awkward. Lynn caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. She hardly recognized herself. She'd spent 2 hours that morning trying to look professional, whatever that meant. Her usual messy bun was replaced with carefully straightened hair, and she'd watched 3 makeup tutorials to achieve what beauty gurus called a natural business look. "Through here," the assistant gestured, opening heavy wooden doors to reveal a conference room bigger than Lynn's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view that made her dizzy. And there, sitting at the end of a massive table, was the man himself, the billionaire she'd mocked in her video. He wasn't what she expected. No fancy suit, no intimidating power pose. Instead, he wore a simple button-down shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much. A half-empty coffee cup sat next to a tablet displaying her viral video. "Please, sit," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. "That's quite a video you made there." Lynn's throat went dry. She'd rehearsed 1,000 apologies, but they all vanished from her mind. I can take it down if you want," she managed to squeak out. To her shock, he laughed. A genuine, tired laugh. "Take it down. Why would I want that? You've done what my entire marketing team couldn't do in 6 months. You got young people talking about educational technology." Lynn blinked in confusion. Was this some kind of trap? But he continued, sliding a folder across the table. "We don't need another yes person in this company. We need someone who understands our blind spots, someone who can tell us when we're being, what did you call it in your video? Out-of-touch rich folks playing scientist." Her face burned red. Those words sounded so much harsher in this fancy conference room than they had in her apartment. But the billionaire was smiling. "I'm offering you a job," he said simply, "not as an apology or a PR stunt. I want you to help us fix what's wrong with our educational platform. You clearly understand what we're missing. Now help us get it right." Lynn's mind raced. Was this really happening? "But I don't have any experience in tech. I make videos in my bedroom." "Exactly," he replied, standing up to look out the window. "You know what students actually need. You speak their language, and most importantly, you're not afraid to call out nonsense when you see it." He turned back to face her, though maybe with slightly less colorful language in the office. The salary written in the folder made her eyes widen. It was more money than she'd ever imagined making, but there was a catch. She'd have to work directly with him, the person she publicly mocked. "Think about it," he said, noticing her hesitation. "But not too long. The video's still going viral, and we need to act fast." He handed her his business card. An actual physical card, like people still use those. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide." As the assistant led her back to the elevator, Lynn's mind was spinning. The same video she thought might get her into trouble had just landed her a job offer that could change her life. But could she really work with someone she criticized so publicly? And more importantly, did she actually have what it takes to help fix a billion-dollar company's biggest failure? The security guard nodded goodbye as she stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. In her pocket, the business card felt like it weighed a ton. She had exactly 18 hours to make the biggest decision of her life. Whatever she chose would make for one hell of a follow-up video, if she was still allowed to make videos at all. 2 weeks into her new job, Lynn discovered that working at a billion-dollar company wasn't anything like she'd imagined. Her tiny corner desk sat outside the billionaire's office, where she spent most days drowning in spreadsheets and market research. The view from the 50th floor was amazing, but she barely had time to look at it. One evening, as most employees headed home, she noticed the lights still on in her boss's office. Through the glass walls, she could see him rubbing his temples, staring at a photo on his desk. It was past 8, and she'd heard him on back-to-back calls since morning. A soft voice broke the silence. "Dad, you promised you'd be home for dinner." Lynn looked up to see a teenage girl standing near her desk, backpack slung over one shoulder, wearing a school uniform that probably cost more than Lynn's monthly rent. "I'll be right there, honey," he called out, but didn't move from his desk. The girl's shoulders slumped. Clearly, she'd heard this before. Lynn didn't mean to eavesdrop, but in the quiet office, every word carried. "It's been 3 days," the girl said. "The housekeeper's cooking is getting old." Something clicked in Lynn's mind. The photo on his desk. It was the same woman whose picture she'd seen in old news articles. His wife, who'd passed away 2 years ago. The articles had called it a tragic accident, but they'd never mentioned the daughter left behind. The girl noticed Lynn watching and gave a small wave. "You're the TikTok girl, right? The one who roasted my dad's project." There wasn't any anger in her voice. If anything, she sounded amused. "That's me," Lynn admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. Though I'm trying to make up for it now. The girl dropped into the chair beside Lynn's desk. "You know what's funny? Dad actually wanted to do something good with that project. He stayed up for days talking about how it could help kids who couldn't afford fancy schools." She glanced at her father's office. "He's just not very good at understanding what normal people need." Lynn looked at her computer screen, where she'd been reviewing feedback from public school teachers. Feedback that had never reached the top floor during the project's development. "Maybe he just needed someone to tell him the truth," she said quietly. "Like you did." The girl grinned. That video was pretty brutal, but honest. She stood up, adjusting her backpack. "Hey, want to come to dinner? The housekeeper makes too much food anyway, and Dad could use a break from his office." Before Lynn could respond, her boss emerged from his office, looking exhausted. "I heard that," he said to his daughter, but he was smiling. He turned to Lynn. "You should join us. We can talk about those teacher feedback reports in a setting that doesn't involve fluorescent lighting." And that's how Lynn found herself in a billionaire's penthouse apartment, eating homemade pasta with the man she'd once mocked online and his daughter. The place was nothing like she'd expected. No gold-plated anything, just comfortable furniture and walls covered in what looked like school art projects. Over dinner, she learned more than she had in 2 weeks at the office. How the educational project had started because he'd seen his daughter struggling to connect with online learning during the pandemic. How he tried to recreate her private school experience for everyone, not realizing that wasn't what most students needed or wanted. "You know what's missing from all this," Lynn said, forgetting for a moment that she was talking to her boss. "You've got all these amazing tools, but they're built for some ideal world where every kid has high-speed internet and the latest devices. What about the students using their phones because they can't afford laptops, or sharing devices with siblings?" She expected him to dismiss her concerns. Instead, he pulled out a notebook and started taking notes. His daughter caught Lynn's eye and gave her a thumbs up. As she rode the subway home that night, Lynn thought about how wrong she'd been in her viral video. She'd seen a cold billionaire pushing expensive tech on schools. Instead, she found a grieving father trying to make a difference the only way he knew how. He just needed someone to show him a better way. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss. "Good points at dinner. Let's rebuild the project from scratch. Your perspective is exactly what we've been missing." Lynn smiled, realizing that sometimes the biggest changes start with someone brave enough to point out what's wrong, and someone humble enough to listen. The whiteboard was covered in sticky notes, diagrams, and half-formed ideas. Lynn stood back, coffee cup in hand, studying their work from the past month. The conference room had become their war room, with takeout containers and energy drink cans scattered around like battle debris. "What if we made it work offline?" she suggested, adding another sticky note to the growing collection. "Like sync when you have internet, but students can still access everything without connection." She thought about her own college days, stealing Wi-Fi from the cafe next door because she couldn't afford internet. Her boss looked up from his tablet, dark circles under his eyes matching hers. They'd been working late almost every night. "Can we do that without compromising the interactive features?" he asked, genuinely curious. Gone was the intimidating billionaire. He'd become more like an eager student, soaking up every suggestion. Actually, his daughter piped up from her homework corner. She'd started hanging out in their meetings after school. My friend was telling me about how she downloads Netflix shows at the library to watch at home. Could we do something like that? Lynn snapped her fingers. Yes, and what if we partner with libraries? They already have computers and internet. We could make them educational hubs. Her mind raced with possibilities. Plus, lots of kids already go there after school while their parents work. The energy in the room shifted. Something was clicking. Their failed educational platform was transforming into something new, something real, something that might actually help. They'd brought in teachers for feedback sessions, not just from private schools, but from public schools in different neighborhoods. Each conversation revealed new challenges they hadn't considered. One teacher mentioned students sharing tablets with siblings. Another talked about kids who could only access the internet on their phones. We need to make it work on any device, Lynn insisted during one late-night session. And I mean any device, even those old phones people donate to schools. She pulled out her own phone, a model several years old. If it can't run on this, we're still missing the point. Her boss nodded, making notes. He'd changed over the past month, started seeing things differently. Sometimes she caught him staring at the user feedback reports with a look of genuine surprise, like he was seeing the real world for the first time. The breakthrough came during a test run at a local public school. They watched as students played with their prototype, not the sleek, expensive version they'd originally launched, but something simpler, faster, more practical. Kids were helping each other, figuring things out together. Even the teacher looked excited. This, the teacher said, pointing to a group of students huddled around a shared tablet. This is what we needed. Not another fancy tool we can't afford. Something that works with what we have. On their way back to the office, Lynn's boss was unusually quiet. You know, he finally said, I spent millions trying to build the perfect educational platform. All those consultants, designers, engineers, and all we needed was to actually listen to the people who would use it. His daughter, who tagged along for the school visit, rolled her eyes. That's what Lynn's been saying since her video, Dad. Lynn smiled, remembering the viral rant that started it all. Hey, at least you listened. Most people in your position wouldn't have. Back in the office, they gathered their team. The revival project was taking shape, but they still had mountains of work ahead. Lynn looked at the whiteboard again, at all those sticky notes full of real problems and real solutions. A notification popped up on her phone. Someone had reshared her old video mocking the company. But this time, it didn't make her cringe. That video had led to something important, something that might actually make a difference. Ready to change some lives? Her boss asked, handing her a fresh cup of coffee. Lynn grabbed a new sticky note. Let's make this thing work for everyone, she said, adding another idea to their growing wall of possibilities. Not just for those who can afford it. His daughter, already back in her homework corner, looked up with a grin. Maybe next time start with asking people what they need before building something. They all laughed, the sound echoing through the office as the sun set over the city. Sometimes the biggest innovations don't come from fancy technology or billion-dollar budgets. Sometimes they come from simply listening to the right voices, even when those voices start by calling you out on social media. The email arrived on a perfectly normal Tuesday morning. Lynn was reviewing user feedback reports when her computer pinged. The sender was from one of the biggest tech companies in the world, their biggest competitor. We've been watching your work, the email read. Your insights into educational technology are exactly what we need. Let's talk about your future. Dinner tonight. The offered salary made her coffee nearly slip from her hands. It was triple what she was making now. But it wasn't just about money. They'd wanted information. Details about the new platform, the features they were developing, everything she'd been working on for the past 3 months. Lynn pushed back from her desk, feeling sick. Through the glass walls, she could see her boss in a meeting, gesturing excitedly about their latest breakthrough. His daughter was probably on her way over after school, ready to do homework in their workspace like she did every day. Her phone buzzed. Another email from the competitor. Just in case you need motivation to make the right choice. Attached was a file that made her blood run cold. Screenshots from her college days, proof of her involvement in a cheating ring. She'd been desperate back then, helping rich kids cheat on their exams for money to pay her tuition. No one knew about this. She'd buried it deep. Think about your career, the email continued. This kind of scandal could ruin everything you've built. The office suddenly felt too small. She rushed to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. In the mirror, her reflection looked pale and scared. Everything she'd worked for could disappear in an instant. Her phone kept buzzing. The competitor wanted an answer by tonight. They knew about meetings scheduled for tomorrow, about the new features they were planning to announce. One word from her, and they'd have everything they needed to beat them to market. Walking back to her desk, she passed the wall of sticky notes. Hundreds of ideas, suggestions from teachers, feedback from students, real solutions for real problems. This wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about making education accessible to everyone. Her boss's daughter waved from her usual spot, headphones in, working on homework. "Hey, Dad says we're ordering pizza for the late meeting. You're staying, right?" Lynn managed a weak smile. That's when she noticed the photo on the girl's laptop. A candid shot of their school visit last week. Students clustered around tablets, genuinely excited about learning. Teachers finally feeling heard. This was bigger than her career, bigger than money or threats. She opened her email and started typing. Not to the competitor, but to her boss. Her hand shook as she attached screenshots of the threatening emails and her old mistakes. Better he hear it from her than someone else. "I need to tell you something," she wrote. "And I understand if you want me to resign after this." The walk to his office felt like miles. He was alone now, reading something on his tablet. He looked up when she entered, and somehow his expression told her he'd already read her email. "Sit down," he said quietly. Lynn's legs felt like jelly as she sank into the chair. "So they tried to bribe you?" She nodded, unable to speak. "And the college scandal? That was real." "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I was desperate back then. I needed the money for—" He held up his hand. "We all have things we're not proud of." He turned his tablet around. On the screen was an old article about his company's early days, headlines about aggressive takeovers and questionable practices. "The question is, what do we do with those mistakes?" Lynn blinked in surprise. "You're not firing me for refusing a bribe and being honest about your past. That would send an interesting message, wouldn't it?" He actually smiled. "Besides, my daughter would never forgive me. She thinks you're the coolest person in the office." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by determination. "They know about tomorrow's meeting, about the new features. Then we better get to work," he said, standing up. "Time to show them what happens when you try to bully the wrong team." As they walked to the conference room, Lynn felt lighter. Her past wasn't gone, but maybe it didn't have to define her future. Sometimes the biggest test of character isn't avoiding mistakes. It's choosing to do better once you've made them. "Hey," her boss said, pausing at the door. "Thank you for being honest. That takes more courage than never making mistakes in the first place." The pizza arrived as they started brainstorming their next moves. Lynn looked around at her team. No, her family now, and knew she'd made the right choice. Some things were worth more than money or an easy way out. The headlines hit like a tornado. Rising tech stars' dark past exposed. Social media sensation caught in college scandal. Viral critic turned employee. A corporate plot. Lynn's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications, each worse than the last. The competing company had leaked everything, not just about her college days, but twisted versions of her current work too. They painted her viral video as a calculated move, suggesting she planned to infiltrate the company all along. Social media, once her playground, had become a battlefield. Standing in the office kitchen, trying to make her third cup of coffee with shaking hands, Lynn overheard two coworkers whispering, Can you believe it? And we thought she was different. The coffee spilled over the rim of her cup, but she barely noticed. The worst part wasn't the media storm. It was the silence from her boss's corner office. He hadn't said a word about the leaks all morning. His daughter, usually bouncing around the office after school, hadn't shown up either. The empty homework corner felt like an accusation. Her old video was circulating again, but this time with cruel commentary. Look who's talking about ethics. Guess she'll do anything for money. Comments flooded in, each one a tiny dagger. The followers who'd once cheered her on were now leading the attack. An intern rushed past her desk, whispering into her phone. Did you see? She even helped rich kids cheat. And now she's working on an educational platform. Lynn's stomach churned. Everything she'd worked for was crumbling. She opened her laptop, trying to focus on work, but the words blurred through her tears. A message popped up from a teacher they'd worked with. My students were so excited about the platform. How could you? Lynn closed the laptop, feeling the walls closing in. The elevator dinged, and her boss's daughter stepped out. Lynn braced herself for more disappointment, but the girl marched straight to her desk. This is ridiculous, she announced, dropping her backpack. Dad's been in meetings all morning trying to handle this mess, but I have a better idea. Lynn blinked in surprise. You don't hate me. The girl rolled her eyes. For what? Making mistakes in college. Pretty sure that's like the whole point of college. She pulled out her phone. But we need to do something. The internet's going crazy, and Dad's old school PR team wants to release some boring statement. What can we do? Lynn asked, gesturing at her screen full of hateful comments. Nobody's going to listen to me now. Wrong, the girl said, a familiar determination in her eyes. She looked just like her father when she had an idea. They're all listening. That's why this is the perfect time to tell the real story. I can't just pretend what I did wasn't wrong, Lynn protested. So don't pretend. Tell the truth. All of it. About being broke in college, about why you made that video, about what we're really trying to do here. The girl was already setting up her phone camera. People love redemption stories, but only if they're real. Lynn stared at her, then at the office around her. At the wall of sticky notes covered in ideas to help students who were struggling. Students just like she had been. At her boss's empty office, where he was fighting corporate battles to protect her. At this teenager who somehow saw past all the headlines to what really mattered. Maybe, Lynn said slowly, maybe this is exactly what needs to happen. Show everyone that people can change, that mistakes don't define you. The girl grinned. Now you're getting it. But first, she pulled up Twitter on her phone. Her father, the billionaire CEO, had finally broken his silence. His tweet was simple. Everyone deserves a second chance, including those brave enough to admit their mistakes. Lynn felt tears coming again, but different this time. Through the glass walls, she saw her boss return to his office. He caught her eye and gave a small nod. In that moment, she knew what she had to do. Okay, she said, turning to face the camera. Let me tell you the real story. Not the one in the headlines, but the truth. About mistakes and money and trying to do better. About how sometimes the people you mock turn out to be the ones who believe in you most. The record button blinked red, and Lynn took a deep breath. Sometimes, she realized, the darkest moments are just the beginning of the best chapters. You just have to be brave enough to turn the page. Hey everyone. Lynn's voice wavered slightly as she faced the camera. No fancy editing this time. No memes or trending sounds. Just the truth. She sat in her familiar bedroom setup, but everything felt different now. The ring light cast shadows on the wall behind her, and her cat dozed peacefully on the desk, unaware of the storm they were about to face. Let's talk about mistakes, she continued. Not just mine, though we'll get to those, but the ones we all make when we judge people without knowing their whole story. She took a deep breath, remembering the viral video that started it all. The words poured out naturally. She told them about being a scholarship kid surrounded by wealth, about watching her mom work 3 jobs to keep them afloat, about the desperation that led her to help rich students cheat, and the shame that followed her long after. "I'm not proud of what I did," she said, looking directly into the camera, "but I'm also not going to hide from it anymore. Those choices taught me something important, about the broken parts of our education system, about privilege, about the lengths people go to when they're desperate." Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, but she kept going. She talked about the educational platform she'd once mocked, about discovering its real purpose, about a billionaire who turned out to be a grieving father trying to make a difference, and his daughter who taught her more about courage than any adult. "You know what's funny?" she said, managing a small smile. "I made that video thinking I was exposing someone's greed. Instead, I exposed my own prejudices. I saw a rich guy pushing expensive tech and missed the whole story. A dad watching students struggle with remote learning, trying to fix it the only way he knew how." Lynn pulled up the initial designs for their new platform on her laptop, showing the camera. "This is what happens when you stop judging and start listening. When you bring together people with different experiences, yes, even people who've made mistakes, and actually try to solve problems." Comments were flooding in, but different from before. "This hit hard. Thank you for being real. We need more honesty like this." She shared clips from their school visits, showing students using their prototype. "These kids don't care about my past mistakes or corporate drama. They care about having tools that actually work for them, that understand their reality." The video took an unexpected turn when her boss's daughter popped into frame via video call. "Tell them about the library program," she exclaimed, her enthusiasm infectious. Together, they explained their plan to partner with public libraries, to make education accessible to everyone, not just those who could afford the latest devices. "I'm resigning from my position," Lynn announced, and the comments exploded with reaction. But before speculation could run wild, she continued, "Not because anyone asked me to, but because this project deserves better than being overshadowed by controversy. I'm going to keep working on it, as a volunteer, consulting with teachers and students directly. No salary, no corporate title, just the work that matters." Her boss appeared in another video window, joining their impromptu broadcast. "And we'll be right there with you," he said. "Sometimes the best ideas come from unexpected places or people." The comments section was a flood of emotions. Teachers started sharing their own stories of students struggling with technology. Parents talked about the challenges of remote learning. Even some of Lynn's harshest critics were changing their tune. "So here's what I've learned," Lynn said, wrapping up the longest and most honest video she'd ever made. "Life isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about what you do after you make them. It's about having the courage to say, 'I was wrong,' and the determination to do better." She looked at the faces in their video chat, her boss, his daughter, and now several teachers and students who joined in to show support. "This isn't the end of the story," she said. "It's just the beginning of a better one. And this time, we're writing it together." The video ended, not with a clever quip or trending sound, but with something more powerful: hope. Within hours, it wasn't just viral. It was starting conversations about second chances, about judging others, about what really matters in education. Sometimes, Lynn realized, the best redemption stories aren't about erasing your past. They're about using it to build a better future. No one expected what happened next. The morning after Lynn's honest video, something extraordinary began to unfold. Her old boss, the billionaire she'd once mocked, posted his own video. No fancy office background, no corporate polish, just him, sitting in what looked like his home study, with his daughter's school artwork visible on the walls behind him. "I've failed more times than I can count," he began, running a hand through his messy hair. "My first company went bankrupt. My second one nearly did. But my biggest failure wasn't in business. It was in forgetting what it's like to struggle." The internet went wild. A billionaire tech CEO admitting failures. Being human. His video quickly matched Lynn's in views. But he wasn't done. When my wife passed away, he continued, his voice softening, I threw myself into work, tried to fix everything with technology and money. My daughter kept telling me I was missing the point, but I didn't listen. Then a young content creator made a video mocking our educational platform, and something clicked. His daughter appeared in the frame, plopping down beside him. He means he finally realized not everyone has the latest iPad, she teased, making him laugh. The comment section exploded with heart emojis. They shared behind-the-scenes clips of their project meetings, Lynn's sticky note wall, late-night brainstorming sessions, pizza-fueled discussions about making education truly accessible. She taught us to listen, the daughter explained, and not just to the people who agree with us. The competing company that had leaked Lynn's past tried to spin more negative stories, but something unexpected happened. Teachers started posting their own confession videos. I cheated in college too, one veteran teacher admitted. Now I help students who are struggling so they don't have to. Another shared how she'd once been fired for challenging her school's unfair policies. Sometimes breaking rules leads to changing them, she said. Students joined in too. They created a hashtag #RealLearning, sharing stories about educational barriers they faced. My family shares one laptop between 4 kids, one teen posted. Try doing remote learning like that. The movement grew beyond just videos. Libraries across the city began offering free workshops, teaching kids to code using the prototype platform. Community centers opened their computer labs after hours. People were finally talking about the real issues in education, not just technology, but access and understanding. Lynn's boss took it further. In a surprise announcement, he pledged to match every dollar communities raised for educational technology. But this time, he said, we're letting them decide what they need. No more solutions from ivory towers. His daughter started a student advisory board, bringing together kids from different backgrounds to test and improve the platform. Because if it doesn't work for everyone, she declared in a viral TikTok, it doesn't really work at all. One evening, about a week after everything exploded, Lynn sat in her old spot in the office. She was there as a volunteer now, helping train community teachers. Through the glass walls, she watched her former boss teaching a coding basics class to a group of enthusiastic middle schoolers. His daughter was helping too, explaining things in ways kids actually understood. Miss Lynn, one of the students called out, "Can you help us with this part?" She joined their table, seeing familiar determination in their eyes. These kids didn't care about corporate drama or past mistakes. They just wanted to learn. Her phone buzzed. Another news outlet requesting an interview, but this time, the headline was different. Educational Revolution. How a viral video sparked real change. The competing company that had tried to destroy her career released their own educational platform that week. It was expensive, flashy, and completely missed the point. Their stock price dropped as parents and teachers chose the more accessible option, the one built on understanding real needs. You know what's funny? Her former boss said later, as they watched students filing out of the makeshift classroom. All this started because you weren't afraid to tell me I was wrong. His daughter looked up from her homework, and because you weren't too proud to listen. Lynn smiled, watching a student help their friend understand a tricky coding concept. Sometimes the best support comes from people who know exactly what it's like to struggle. And sometimes the biggest changes start with one person brave enough to speak up, and another brave enough to listen. 1 year later, Lynn stood backstage at a major tech conference, fidgeting with her microphone. Through the curtain, she could hear the buzz of thousands of people waiting. The same stage where tech giants usually announce their latest gadgets was about to tell a different kind of story. Ready? Her former boss appeared beside her, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. His daughter tagged along, already recording everything on her phone for their documentary project. Remember when I was just a girl making ranty videos in my bedroom? Lynn laughed nervously. Now look at us. The platform they'd built together was launching today. Not with fancy marketing or expensive ads, but with real stories from real users. The presentation screen showed photos from their journey. Libraries packed with kids coding after school. Community centers running tech workshops. Students teaching other students. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed. Please welcome the team behind the most talked about educational revolution of the year. Walking onto that stage felt surreal. The lights were bright, but Lynn could see familiar faces in the crowd. Teachers they'd worked with, students who tested every version of their platform, even some of her original followers who'd stuck with her through everything. This story started with a viral video. Lynn began, her voice steady now. A video where I mocked a billionaire for being out of touch. Plot twist. I ended up working for him. Bigger plot twist. We both learned we were wrong about a lot of things. The audience laughed, and she relaxed. This wasn't about corporate presentations or tech specs. This was about something bigger. They showed their numbers. Over 200 libraries now operating as tech hubs. Thousands of students accessing education on devices they already owned. Homework completion rates up 60% in partner schools. But the real power was in the stories. A single mom appeared on screen, talking about how her kids could now study on her old smartphone while she used the family laptop for work. A teenager demonstrated how he taught his grandmother to use the platform's simplified interface. Teachers shared stories of students helping each other, creating study groups across different neighborhoods. But here's the real success. Lynn's former boss took over. We stopped trying to fix education from the top down. Instead, we learned to listen to the people who needed it most. His daughter jumped in, showing slides of their student advisory board in action. Every feature, every update, every decision. It all goes through real users first. No more guessing what people need. The competing company that had tried to destroy Lynn's career sat in the audience, watching their own expensive platform lose more ground each day to this simpler, more accessible solution. We're not just launching a platform today. Lynn continued, we're starting a movement. Every dollar we make goes back into expanding access. Every school that buys our premium version sponsors 10 schools that can't afford it. The audience erupted when they announced their next phase, partnering with rural communities, bringing tech education to places usually left behind. The Billionaire CEO, who once built towers of glass and steel, was now building bridges of opportunity instead. But my favorite part of this whole journey. Lynn smiled, looking at her former boss and his daughter. It proved that sometimes your biggest critics become your best allies. That mistakes don't define you. What you learn from them does. As they wrapped up, students from their first pilot program rushed the stage, creating a moment no corporate PR team could have planned. Kids from different backgrounds, all excited about learning, all part of something bigger than themselves. Later that evening, Lynn sat in their old office, surrounded by the original sticky notes that started it all. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had reshared her original mocking video, but this time with a different caption. The video that accidentally changed education. Her former boss's daughter poked her head in. Hey, the documentary team wants more footage of the early days. Got any embarrassing stories to share? Lynn looked around at what they'd built together. Not just a platform, but a community. You know what? I think we're just getting started. Because sometimes the best endings aren't endings at all. They're just the beginning of a bigger story. One where past mistakes become future wisdom, where critics become collaborators, and where success isn't measured in dollars, but in lives changed. The real revolution wasn't in the technology they'd built. It was in the bridges they'd created between people who might never have connected otherwise. And that was worth more than all the viral videos in the world.